Okay, I'm so excited to, okay, I feel like I should like sit properly, but I'm so bad and I'm a huncher. Okay. I'm so excited to be making today's video because honestly, this has been such a long road. I've been working in HR now for almost 4 years this year, but I finally landed my first internship in tech, and so I just wanted to share everything I've learned from working in HR as a recruiter, what I've learned, the things that have made me be able to get interviews, speak with people, get to know people, and then actually land a internship with a global company. And so I have 10 things listed down here on my notebook that personally I feel like I've learned as a recruiter, and then just some of my little tips and tricks that I would say helped me and what I'm going to be used moving forward as I go from, you know, this career that I previously had and now I'm transitioning. So how I'm going to transition from internship to trying to secure a full-time position. And so the first thing that I wanted to talk about was something that I remember when I was 18, and at the time I was in the military, and somebody was telling me, I had a higher up who was telling me, you know, network. But really what it is, and I guess you can use the word network, but building relationships is super critical. I think the biggest mistakes before I became a recruiter, so I started as an assistant, then a project coordinator, then a recruiter within HR. So I worked my way up. And prior to becoming a recruiter, I can say the biggest mistakes that I made was that I was aimlessly applying to a ton of tech jobs. Especially I spent, oh my God, it's been over a year ago now, but I spent so much time applying to almost like 1,000 jobs on Audda. And if you haven't heard of that before, Audda.com has a ton of like startups, mid-size, really large companies. It's a lot of tech companies, and I honestly prefer it over LinkedIn. And I'll say the reason is because there is so much more information about the benefits, about the CEO, about the owner, about the company, their funding. Like there's a lot more in-depth information compared to LinkedIn, where it's just like the job description, which I really like about Audda because it goes with one of the tips and things that I've learned as a recruiter. Anyways, so building relationships, and I say it this way because again, I was applying aimlessly. I wasn't connecting with people who were working for the company or reaching out to people or trying to make connections. I was just trying to use my resume. And then now as a recruiter, relationships 10 out of 10. And I say it because as a recruiter on a day-to-day basis, I am overwhelmed by the amount of applications that come in for a single posting. And so, you know, recruiters don't just have like one posting. We have multiple postings, and depending on how large the company is, some recruiters have well over 20, 30 positions open at the time where they're constantly looking at resumes. So when you're applying for the big FANG, so Facebook, Apple, Amazon, Netflix, Google, just imagine how much applications one person has to sort through for one opening. And the hard part is, like, I know me personally, I'll start at the bottom from like who applied first from the opening and then sort from there. But even then, once I've scheduled people in, my schedule, I only work 8-hour days. Like I can only speak to people for so long that I end up having to put applications on hold because of the amount that come through. With that being said, and the reason I'm going back to building relationships is because when I get I don't want to say interdepartment, But within the company, when I get, hey, I have somebody that I know who's looking for a position, here's their resume, I will instantly reach out to them and instantly set up an interview, because it came within the company, not because it was more credible, but in a sense where it like is instantly in my inbox, and I'm not having to filter through the thousands that maybe they did apply, but they're, you know, application 567 out of 999, if you get what I mean. And so that's where I'm talking about building relationships, and I'll get to that, like, well, I don't know people in tech. What if you don't know people in tech? Or what if you don't know people in a certain industry? I'll get to some of the tips that I have for that closer towards the end. And then the second tip that I have as a recruiter is your resume needs to reflect the job you're applying for. And I say this with so much emphasis because sometimes people put irrelevant experience on their resume, and I only have so much time in a day, just like every other recruiter who's getting so many applications, so many notifications, and usually that's not the only thing that they're doing in the recruiting process. And so you really need to be to the point with your career objective. Be very clear and concise with your college. I think for me, importantly, it's most important that when I'm looking at a resume, especially because for some of the jobs that I hire for, like, you have to be graduated. Like, you have to have graduated, you have to have this certain certification or licensing, like, have that date on there. If I have to search for it, I have to put you on hold and look at the next one. And then make sure you're using numbers and utilizing the amount of things that you've done and relating that to the job. If the job is saying that it wants somebody who's, you know, able to process over 100 things, or, you know, able to work in a team-oriented environment, like, that should be blatantly there for the recruiter and, like, bold right there in your face. And less is more, which I believe is on my list. Yes, less is more. When I have to scroll through a 4-page resume to see, like, specific things that, okay, say you know, applied for a specific posting, and there's certain things that the hiring manager let me know is like a minimum criteria. If I have to constantly look through your resume, it's gonna end up on hold, because I don't have time to, you know, email you. And sometimes I do, and I email people and I ask them specific questions about their resume before doing an interview, but most recruiters are not going to do that, especially with how busy they are, and especially in tech. And so it's really, 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 really important to make your resume reflect the job that you're applying for. So how does your, if you have no experience in tech, how does your experience at your current job reflect how you'd be a great fit for that current job? And really using the verbiage and the numbers and combining those together to make you be seen by the recruiter as the best fit. And so I actually did 3 because less is more, but the next one is research the company that you're applying to. It is such a basic thing, but sometimes it really stinks when I get candidates who, like, I have multiple candidates for a position, and then I get candidates who I ask them, you know, why did you choose to apply for us? Like, why did you want to work for us? And they're like, oh, I just stumbled upon you on the internet. But that's the answer I write down, and that's the answer I end up sending to the hiring manager. And so you want, most likely the recruiter is your direct line to the hiring manager. They're usually not the final say. Most times, like 9 out of 10, they're not in the recruiting process. It's the hiring managers. So when they're asking you those specific questions about why you chose this company, You know, why did you apply? Have a good answer to that. You know, reflect back on, these are the values that I, you know, see in myself that are also reflected in your company's values, and correlate that back, because that's what's going to make your candidate summary, is usually what gets sent by a recruiter to a hiring manager, look that much better than the next person, which again goes into my next my next tip, which is be clear and concise with your answers. Of course, when you're interviewing, you never specifically know what a recruiter is going to ask you, especially in tech, because in tech you also have, you know, technical questions, and then you have behavioral questions, a lot of like mixture of questions. But actually preparing, and I know most things that you watch, people will say, well, prepare for, and you're like, okay, well, how do I prepare? But go through Glassdoor, see the types of questions that they ask, and then write different scenarios down and practice them. That was the biggest thing that I did last year, was I practiced so many different scenarios, so many different answers to questions, so that way I could be clear and concise with my answer. Because when you're not clear and concise, and also take a deep breath, slow. Remember that the recruiter is writing everything that you say down, and so if you're just rambling and going really fast, they're only getting small bits and pieces of what you're saying. So take that deep breath and then be confident in what you say, but don't be, I think the other thing that kind of takes recruiters back, and it takes me back, is there's a difference between confidence and then kind of being, I can't think of the word right now. It's not overly confident, but more so you want to show that you want the job, but at the same time you don't want to say that you're more competent than the people interviewing you, in a sense. And so that is one of the things that I would say is one of my biggest tips. And then the next tip, especially with me, be persistent with keeping up with the recruiter. If you haven't heard from the recruiter in a week, send a follow-up email, you know, say thank you so much for your time. You know, I reached, after speaking with the hiring manager, I feel like I would be a great fit. Maybe there was a different scenario that they had gone over with you, and they asked you, you know, how would you solve this? And if you didn't solve it, and you'd say to get back to them. Or if you did and you said, you know, I even thought of something better, or here's how I would tackle this solution. Just coming back and following up with the recruiter is super important, because after we've kind of done that handoff with the hiring manager, sometimes the hiring managers get busy, they tell us they're going to reach out, sometimes they don't, they forget. And even though we remind them, it's nice when you have a candidate who is actively showing that they want the position, rather than somebody who a month later was like, oh yeah, sorry, I was really busy, because I have had that before as well. And that's okay too, but most often than not, you're not going to get chosen for that position. And so my next tip was less is more, but I kind of used that with my number 2 tip. And the next one after is be professional. And I say that in a sense of, even if it's millennial, Gen Z, speaking with you on the phone, still be professional about, even if it's a phone interview and they can't see you, if you're scrummaging around in the background with paper, or, you know, turning on a microwave or the sink, I think for recruiters, including myself, it's really distracting. And then we get distracted and it almost feels like you don't really care that much, and it gives off this perception that it's just like, oh, I don't have the time out of my day for a few minutes to just, you know, if you're at a job and you're applying in the middle of the day, like going in the car or maybe going in the bathroom where it's quiet, and just, you know, being professional in that call, as well as just being professional in your tone and how you speak and how you're portraying yourself to the recruiter. And the next one is definitely one that I used to make a mistake of doing, and then I became a recruiter. I was like, oh my god, that's probably one of the reasons why I didn't get chosen for interviews. And it's formatting your resume. Your resume is your first line, especially if you're not making connections with people. It's the first thing that the recruiter sees about you. So format it, make it look good, and not only that, do not, and I repeat, do not send a recruiter a .docs file, a .txt file. Every single file that you send and submit should all be PDFs. And here's why. If I cannot open it on a Mac, I'm not going to go to extra lengths to try and open it in Google Docs, to convert it, to do anything. It is a complete waste of time when I have tons of other candidates, and I know a lot of other recruiters are the same way. PDF is just completely universal. And .txt file, it doesn't keep your resume formatted in the way where it looks nice. And most often than not, I've had actually a recent candidate who, she was a good candidate. She submitted her resume.txt file. I knew that it wasn't the best thing, but I still sent her information over to the hiring manager, and the hiring manager was just so taken back by, one, that they couldn't spend the extra few minutes just turning it into a PDF file and formatting it, or maybe going in Google Docs and just creating a PDF file from that. And because it was just so messy, they had passed on them. And so please, please, please format your resume. The next tip that I have is put yourself out there. And when I say put yourself out there, if you see somebody on YouTube, if you hear a guest on a podcast that is in another industry that you want to be in, or in a position that you want to be in, reach out to them. Reach out to them on socials, reach out to them on LinkedIn, whatever you feel comfortable reaching out to them, and ask them what is it that they like about the company. Do they even like the company that they work for? And, you know, asking them for their time. And this is less about what I've learned as a recruiter, but more so what I've learned as somebody who's applying to jobs in tech. And the reason I say this is because I, this past year, put myself out there in a way that was, one, so uncomfortable for me, but it pushed me out of my comfort zone to be able to land an internship with a global company. And so one of the ways was I listened to an interview that was posted on YouTube, and the guy who was being interviewed for one of the big FANG companies had said he was open to mentorship. Reach out to him on LinkedIn. So I ended up sending him a message on LinkedIn and asking to connect, and then within 3 months later he accepted my connection, and I made that core connection with a company that I feel so aligned with and who I feel like I could bring my skills and my values to. And so that was one of the ways that I put myself out there. The other 2 ways that I put myself out there was by joining a women's technology group for like the actual state, getting a mentor, and then getting a mentor, and then attending all of the events and networking with all the other women and speaking with women who are working in tech. And that has been honestly one of the greatest, one, assets, and 2, blessings that I could have asked for. My mentor that I ended up being paired with is the director for one of the big FANG companies, and the director of recruiting for one of the big FANG companies, as well as her connections and who she was connected with, and then me showing up to a lot of the local networking events for technology committees. And even though I wasn't actively in the tech industry yet, I still showed up, and I felt so awkward. It felt so out of my comfort zone, but I still went and I still introduced myself to every single person in the room. And the reason I say that is because it ends up to the point where people remember your name, people remember who you are. And so when you're applying for these positions, they're like, wow, I met her at an event, or you know what, I know somebody who's hiring, can I get your resume? And that's what ended up happening for me, and just really putting myself out there. The last way that I put myself out there, where I was like, oh my god, I'm not good enough to do this, who am I? Just a lot of not enoughness. And it was doing an Ethereum hackathon. I did 2 or 3 last year. I met so many amazing people from around the world. I made so many amazing connections, and it is honestly what had opened my eyes to AWS and cloud. And now here I am a year later, and I just recently competed in a cyber defense competition that had to do with the Amazon cloud. So it's really funny how things end up turning out. And so again, putting yourself out there, attending events, attending different committees, and even if you're not even a part of that industry yet, find out where they are and go there. And so that was also part of my last tip, which was utilizing local networks, which again, where I said I went to local committee gatherings, and they're like, oh, who are you and who do you work for? I'm like, oh, I don't work for anyone yet, but here's who I am, and here's what I want to do, and I'd love to get to know you more. And walking around that room and having that elevator pitch down packed, so that everyone, even if they're not hiring, remembers who you are. And so a couple of little tips, especially for LinkedIn, that I wanted to share that I've seen a lot of other fellow recent graduates kind of struggle with, or people who are still in college and may not realize affects your ability or hireability, on LinkedIn, is not having a professional headshot. That is one of them, especially if you take selfies or you're in the car. But people want that clear photo on a white background wall. It doesn't have to be a white background wall, but just having a clear photo of your face of who you are, who is this person, and not you with your Starbucks cup or with your car in the background, and just really being you, yourself. And then writing your bio and your headline in an active voice that is engaging. And all that is what recruiters will see, and that is what is actually really important for them to be able to actually find you on LinkedIn when they are doing active searches. And that's how I've had quite a few recruiters reach out to me, and having your posts updated. So if you haven't posted in a while, posting, I'm an aspiring software engineer and what was your passion for software engineering? Or maybe you're an aspiring product manager, you're an aspiring project manager. There's so many different things that you can do within tech. And what made you inspired to do that job? What makes you a good fit? And writing a post on that, and then make sure that you're using the hashtags open to work and the actual specific industry. Maybe if there's companies that you're trying to target, using their hashtags, see what hashtags they're using on LinkedIn. Okay, so highlighting your gaps in your resume to put them in a positive light. And so another example could be, maybe you left for your family, and so how did that time with your family contribute to you being ready for a role that you know, requires different types of dynamics. And so really relating, you know, I've got a handle on being the person who can handle multiple things within my home, and now I'm ready to take on and use that in the workforce to take on multiple projects. And the last thing is 99% of the time recruiters are going to ask you this question, which is, why are you looking for a new position, or why are you looking to make a career change at this time? And answer honestly, but again, always bring it back to the current position that you're applying for. Even if your current workplace is super toxic, horrible for your mental health, come back to, you know, my current position isn't allowing me to develop and grow my skills as and along my examples, I'm using software engineer, as a software engineer. And I love that your company is all about growing and developing your software engineers to, you know, move and grow into more dynamic roles. And that's why I was really attracted to this opening. And so again, really reeling it back, making it positive, even if your current or previous position was toxic, you don't want to portray that in your interview. So, okay, and so before I go, I will explain how I ended up landing my first position in tech as an intern, of course. And so for me, what I did is I applied to the opening in November. And then in December, I attended all of the local Christmas parties for local networking events. I went to some of the like state tech events and more small ones. I started reaching out to people who worked for the company on LinkedIn and asking, you know, hey, can I get 10 minutes of your time? I started reaching out to other women who worked within the company and asking them, you know, excuse me, of what they enjoyed about working for the company, how did they get into this field, how did they, you know, start working for this company. And then when I started making connections with people within the company, that's how, and of course, like I had a great resume, I had the skills and experience that were required for the internship, but I made sure on top of that I was connecting with people, that I was utilizing the resources and tools that are available. You just have to know how to look for them. And that is how I ended up landing my internship. And I don't want to say who they are just because, and maybe I will once I actually start, but I just like don't want to jinx it and then it would be all over the internet. Not jinx it, I was already offered the position, I already signed a contract, but it's still, I'll just wait until I start to share that. But I did just kind of want to share the small tidbits of how I ended up landing that one. And that one really for me was, I hustled so hard with networking and on LinkedIn, again, going to local events, going to state events, joining committees, and really putting myself out there, which is why I wanted to share in this video some of the tips that, one, I've learned as a recruiter, and two, my experience, because previous to that, last year, I had interviewed with quite a few companies, and it had always ended up where I would get to the end and they say that they picked another candidate because they'd already worked in tech before, and I didn't have any tech experience. And so for me, it was really disheartening to constantly hear no. So I knew that there had to be something that I had to change in order for me to be able to land my dream internship, especially with everything that I'm getting. And I can't wait to share that on my first week and to share everything that I'm getting. It's so mind-blowing to me and makes me so excited because I've never had a job that like you got so much on this stuff that I'm like, wow, this feels like such a dream. Either way, I just wanted to share my tips and tricks as a recruiter to help you land your hopefully your dream job, oh my goodness, in tech, and know that you're not alone. You're not the only person who's applied to hundreds of jobs and gotten hundreds of no's, or made it to the end of an interview only to hear that they chose somebody else. And so if you want, you can reach out to me. I'll leave my information below. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, Instagram. I'm not really on much anymore. I always leave my email in the video description, oh my goodness. And if you want to just get more, you know, eyes on your resume, or somebody to kind of just give you more insight into like what the recruiting process looks like and how to better position yourself as a candidate, please feel free to reach out to me. And thank you so much for watching this video, and if you enjoyed it, please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel, and I hope I can bring more videos like this so I can share more helpful and useful tips for people like you who want to get their foot into tech and change careers and make a change for themselves. So I'll see you guys next time.